All right, let's take a look at number 7, Wordle. You're writing a clone of the hit game Wordle. Implement the check correctness function, which takes in a linked list guess, with each element as an individual letter and a string correct word. The function should output a linked list with one of the following colors at each of the corresponding positions in guess. Green, if letter in guess is both in the correct word and in the correct position. Yellow, if letter in guess is in the correct word but not in the correct position. Black, if letter in guess is not in correct word. Both guess and correct word will always be the same length, and you can assume they have unique and lowercase letters. Note, you can use indexing and the in operator on strings just like lists, but you cannot use them on a link object. So based on this note, I'm assuming that somewhere in this problem, I'm going to have to use string indexing or using the in operator on string. All right, let's take a look at the skeleton code. So in this doc test, we set guess equal to link C, link R, link A, link N, and link E. So if we remember in the instructions above, each element is an individual letter. So when we look at this guess linked list, we can see it as the word crane. Next, we have the correct word set equal to the word train. We then check correctness of guess and correct word, and we get link black, link green, link yellow, and link black once again. So where did these links come from? Well, if we look at these rules, we can remember that we will get a green link if the letter of guess is in the correct word and in the correct position. We will get a yellow link if it's in the correct word but not in the correct position, and a black link if the letter is just not in the correct word at all. So when comparing the guess crane with the correct word train, we can see that the first letter of crane is C. Train does not contain C, so we will output a black link. Next, we look at the letter R. The letter R in crane and the letter R in train are in the exact same position, so we can output a green link. Similarly, both A's are in the correct position, are in the same position as well, so we will output a green once again. Now we check the N in crane with the N in train. The problem with the N in crane is that it's not in the same position as the one in the correct word, so we will output a yellow link instead. And finally, we look at the E in crane. Train does not contain an E, so we output a black link. Okay, now let's look at the code itself. So we have this check correctness function that actually returns a helper function that we're filling out. When we see that it returns this helper function, the helper function takes in the arguments guess, correct word, and 0. This means that in the first iteration of this loop, or of this helper function, we will be setting I equal to 0. So it's good to take note of that. All right, now let's look at the first blank itself. We have if guess is link.empty, return blank. Well, this is usually a common occurrence in linked lists, where if the link list that we're checking is empty, then we can just return itself. So here, I'll just return guess. And this makes sense because if there's nothing else to guess, then we can just return a blank. We can just return link.empty. Okay, next we have this rest is equal to blank. I'm not sure what to put here yet because there's not really any context to it. So let's move on to the other parts of this question. Let's instead take a look at these three conditionals here: if, else if, and else, which all return a linked list and rest. So if we think about these three conditionals on what they could be doing, we can remember that to check if we want green, yellow, or black, we essentially want to use three conditionals. So I'm going to assume that these three conditionals will be checking where we want to put green, yellow, and black. So first of all, checking if a link is green, that means that the letter in the guess and the letter in correct word are in the exact same position. So first of all, how can we even get the letter from guess itself when it's like inside a linked list? Well, we can use link.first, or in this case, guess.first, to get the first value inside the linked list, which will be C. So we can check if guess.first is equal to something. Now, what is the something? Well, we're checking the first letter of guess, which means we will also want to check the first letter of correct word. Well, how can we get this first letter of correct word? If we recall in the note above, we can use indexing in strings. So that means the first letter in our correct word will be correct word of 0. So we can fill in correct word here. The problem here is we don't want to just put 0 every time, because if we just put 0, if we're just checking correct word of 0 every time, in this case, we're just going to keep checking T over and over again because we never check the rest of the letters in string. So instead, we can see that I here is already set to 0. So we can instead use 0 and remember to increment I somehow later on. So if this statement is satisfied, then we will return a green link. Now, let's think about how we can return a yellow link. Well, a yellow link will occur if the letter is in the correct word, but not in the correct position. So coincidentally, we can once again use the note above as our hint. And here it tells us that we can use the in operator on strings. So we can just check if the letter guess.first is in the correct word. And if it is in the correct word, then we can output the yellow link. Finally, we will return the black link if none of these conditions are satisfied. All right, everything looks good so far, but all we're missing is this rest here. Well, judging by the name rest, it seems like we need to get the rest of something. And what could that be? Well, it's most likely guess, because remember, so far in one iteration, we've only checked the first letter C and the first letter T. We still want to check the rest of the letters R, A, N, and E. So how can we move our pointer from this link to the next link? Well, we can use guess.rest. So we can use our helper function here and use recursion to check the rest of the linked list. So instead of putting in guess as the argument, we'll instead put in guess.rest to check the rest of the letters. Next, for correct word, we will still put in correct word because the correct word does not change. We still want to check our contents with that correct word. But for I, remember we said before that we want to increment I, otherwise we will only check the first letter of the correct word. So to get the next letter of the correct word R, all we need to do is increment I by 1. And every time we recurse through, we will recurse from C to R to A to N to E, and as well in the correct word, we will go from T to R to A to I to N by indexing. So everything looks good, and this looks pretty solid. We should be good, and that's problem 7.